I guess were you planning, like, did you already plan that during your talk you would, I don't know if you can say, if you want to reference them to next slide or anything like that, or, because that's...
Maybe I'll just tell them what the slides are there if they want to see some visual descriptions of these examples.
And that way you throw them off.
Sure, yeah. That might work better, yeah. If I start saying, you know,
Good morning. I invite you to pause with me for a moment of prayer and reflection. Holder of time and all of our days, we gather today giving thanks for all those across history who had the vision to build a better tomorrow. We are particularly grateful for those who saw the importance of education shaped by values and character and the power of possibility, and ones who sought to open those doors to students who were denied opportunities elsewhere. As we go forward building on that legacy, enable us to treasure the significance of both knowledge and wisdom, of progress and tradition. Help us to see the places where the work remains incomplete, where doors remain closed, and where aspiration still needs to be met with determination. May the beacon of the past lead us to bring floods of light for generations yet to come. Together we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Walt, for those very thoughtful words and so appropriate to the event we celebrate today. Good morning and welcome to Founders Day for 2022. Although we are once again offering today's program virtually, it has been a pleasure to have our speaker join us on campus yesterday and today to meet with students, faculty, and others. Founders Day is a tradition honored at many of our fellow institutions. The founding of Illinois Wesleyan in 1850 was part of a larger cultural movement in America in the mid-19th century, fueled by religious piety, civic pride, and a deep respect for education. All across America, but particularly in the upper Midwest, it seemed that every community and religious denomination wanted to found a seat of higher learning. Illinois has more than 50 small private colleges, and the majority of them came into being at that time. I mentioned three motives for this burgeoning of colleges and universities. First, religious piety. America's original colonial colleges had a primary objective of training ministers, educating men, of course, for a religious calling remained a central motive for college founding in the 19th century. IWU's story is interesting because it was founded as a Methodist institution, but the founding fathers were not all Methodists. 12 were Methodist ministers, but 18 were not. In fact, as some of you will know, in our founding document, the institution's title is Illinois University. Wesleyan is inserted above the line as a handwritten edit in the text. Second, I mentioned civic pride. Early records about the university's founding show an enormous pride and confidence in the anticipated importance of Central Illinois. Destiny seems to point out this valley as the depository of the great heart of the nation. On a somewhat less grand scale, the founders clearly wanted to elevate Bloomington by the founding of a college. As one wrote, "We cannot begin too soon." Third, respect for education. On the one hand, America has always had a tradition of anti-intellectualism. But on the other hand, from its earliest days, there has been a belief in the power, the necessity of education. The founders of the Massachusetts Bay Colony established Harvard within 9 years of arriving in America. They saw it as one of the most important institutions needed in this new country. The founders of Illinois Wesleyan stand in that same tradition. There were fits and starts in our founding. It was not a smooth road. Hopes would rise and then be dashed. But the founders persevered because they felt that a seat of advanced learning, as they put it, was so important to the destiny of this region. I emphasized these three motives that contributed to the founding of Illinois Wesleyan because it's important not to lose sight of them in our contemporary environment when all three may seem to be in short supply. But faith, care for the community, and belief in the power of education stand at our core, and in recognizing Founders Day, we continue to celebrate those values. The Founders Day we observe today was established by the Board of Trustees in 1913. In recent years, we have linked Founders Day to our annual intellectual theme, which draws together guest speakers and courses to address an overarching issue of importance. This year's annual theme has been carried over and is the same as last year's theme, that is, health, healing, and humanity. And we can all understand why that theme obviously could not be more relevant in our contemporary world, as we see these three inextricably intertwined in the context of the coronavirus pandemic. Our speaker today, Dr. William Murphy, a 1998 physics graduate of the university, is a biomedical researcher, truly on the cutting edge of health and healing, as he works to develop innovative technologies in regenerative medicine that utilize not man-made materials, but materials already present in nature. These technologies can hold exciting promise that may one day make it possible to rebuild tissue for the body's organs, muscle, and bone. I will shortly ask Provost Brodel to introduce our speaker in more detail and his fascinating career, both as a researcher and as an entrepreneur. Dr. Murphy, thank you very much for being an outstanding example of what Illinois Wesleyan graduates can accomplish and contribute to our society. And thank you for your generosity in spending time meeting with our students yesterday and today, actually, but particularly your time last evening in a Zoom call with recipients of the Bill and Katie Murphy Research Fellowship, which you have so generously funded. And thank you for speaking to us today on the topic of mimicking nature to create new technology. Provost Brodel.
Thank you, Georgia. It is my pleasure to introduce today's Founders Day Convocation speaker. Dr. Bill Murphy, Illinois Wesleyan class of 1998, is currently the Harvey D. Spangler Endowed Professor of Biomedical Research, Orthopedics, and Rehabilitation at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. There he is the principal investigator of the 20-member Bioinspired Materials Lab in the UW-Madison's Stem Cell Regenerative Medicine Center. I will note that over a quarter of his team are actually made of undergraduate students. His research conducts cutting-edge look at biomaterials that can support human stem cell growth and tissue formation for clinical work, drawing inspiration from a range of biological materials and processes. These biomaterials include support matrices, growth factors, and neighboring cells. Inspiration for innovation comes from nature, bringing lessons learned from the structures and developmental rules followed by the growth of organs as wide-ranging as plant cells and seashells. His team also uses tissues on a chip, neuronal stem cells grown into tissues in a hydrogel-containing microchip that allows his research group to investigate efficiently the properties and biosafety properties of various compounds and developing brain structures. This work helps to set the stage for truly exciting possibilities in tissue regeneration following disease or damage. Dr. Murphy was also recently named the director of the Forward Bio Institute. This institute seeks to expedite the translation of laboratory innovations into healthcare solutions that address societal healthcare needs. Their focus on discovery, training, and development across a wide partner base brings together incubators, investors, and companies. Dr. Murphy's interest in the fundamental properties of materials was nurtured as a student here at Illinois Wesleyan University with Dr. Gabe Spalding's laboratory. He graduated from IWU with a major in physics and played baseball for his 4 years here as well. He went on to the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, to earn a master's degree and PhD in biomedical engineering. He did postdoctoral research in chemistry at the University of Chicago, and then joined the faculty at University of Wisconsin-Madison in 2004. He has authored over 160 journal articles and has over 50 patents. In addition, he has co-founded multiple venture-backed startup companies. Dr. Murphy's Convocation Day address is entitled, "Mimicking Nature to Create New Technology." Please join me in providing a warm welcome to Dr. Bill Murphy.
Thank you. Thanks to President Nugent, Provost Brodel, and all the IWU community for inviting me to speak. It's truly an honor to be here to tell you about some of my work, and as was mentioned, I'll be talking about how we endeavor to mimic nature to create new types of technologies. Many of the students and faculty who may be listening to this might immediately react by saying, this is not a new concept, and indeed it is not in any way a new concept. The leather wallet in your pocket, the wooden pencil in your backpack, the cotton clothing you're wearing are all examples of naturally derived technologies that are commonplace. Even in biomedical applications, there's a very long history of use of natural materials or naturally derived materials in medicine. An example nearly everyone in the audience has likely experienced are the types of sutures that are used to sew wounds together and encourage healing of tissues. These have often been made of natural collagen or silk-based materials. But I want to note today and really try to convince you, I suppose, as students who are starting to work in these kinds of areas, that this only scratches the surface of a much broader opportunity. Nature is a virtually endless feedstock of raw materials for new ideas. There are a broad variety of examples of diversity in human biology. Among the 30 trillion cells that are present in the human body, there are at least 200 different cell types that are present, and each one of these individual cell types can provide inspiration for developing structurally and functionally new materials and technologies. Also, anyone who works on cell biology would tell you that there are far more than 200 distinct phenotypes of these types of cells. So each individual cell type, like a bone-forming cell, for example, probably has 10 to 20 other functions that are not consistent with that function, but provide more inspiration for development of new technologies. So one could argue that even just among the cells that are present in the human body, there are thousands of different inspirations for new technology development. If we go one step deeper and we look at molecules that are present in human biology, there are almost 25,000 protein encoding genes in the human genome, a tremendous diversity of structure and function. For each of those proteins, there may be tens of different functions that are present and can be mimicked, providing structural support, binding other proteins, undergoing conformational changes, catalyzing chemical reactions, activating the immune system, and many other possible functions. Each one of these functions you'll recognize as an inspiration for development of new biomedical technologies. And if we consider that there are 25,000 protein encoding genes and perhaps 10 functions per protein, we're already in the hundreds of thousands of different types of structures and functions that we can try to mimic in developing new technologies. Also, to go even further, this is only human biology. This is only one species. There are an estimated 8.7 million species on Earth, and only about 1.2 million of these species have been formally described, which means that we can generate not just that much inspiration from human biology, but we can use the other 1.2 million formally described species as inspiration And we can continue to discover new functions that are present in nature and haven't yet been formally described. So the main point here is that there's a giant amount of biological structure and function that's present on Earth, and it can be a tremendous inspiration for those developing new technologies. What I'd like to do now is describe a few examples in which my lab over the years has used nature as an inspiration to develop medical device technologies and drug delivery technologies. And I'll describe essentially what question drove the work and where the work ultimately headed. If you have access to the slides that have been posted associated with this event, you can follow along as well and see some of the pictures associated with this. The first example I'd like to describe involves creating a 3D printed bone mimic for bone regeneration. One of the first projects I got involved in after leaving Illinois Wesleyan in the late 1990s was a project in which we were developing synthetic materials that were similar enough to bone tissue that they could support regeneration of new bone, but would dissolve over time and get replaced by that new bone. In this case, what we're mimicking is the fact that bone continuously regenerates itself. We wanted to take advantage of that and use some of the biological mechanisms to build new materials that would stimulate bone regeneration. We also needed to develop structures that could be strong and tough and be capable of supporting bone tissue during the healing of a bone fracture, for example. We were fortunate to be able to collaborate with a mechanical engineer and 3D printer named Scott Hollister, who was already developing three-dimensional bone replacement constructs. We combined our technologies to form these 3D printed bone mimics and to form a startup company called Tissue Regeneration Systems. That company ultimately developed these ideas into products. Those products were licensed to Johnson & Johnson via Johnson & Johnson's Innovation Center. And those technologies are now clinical products for long bone healing, particularly for patients who have very difficult to heal fractures. Hundreds of patients have been treated successfully with this approach, and Johnson & Johnson is now developing a new version of this technology for craniomaxillofacial applications. A second example I'd like to describe is an area where we became interested in trying to solve a significant problem in drug and gene delivery. When one develops medicines for treatment of disease, those medicines oftentimes are complex molecules. These might be proteins, they might be messenger RNA, which you've heard quite a lot about in the recent news. They might be DNA strands, they might be viruses. There are lots of different categories of these types of biological molecules. What we and others have discovered over the last several decades is that these molecules tend to be highly unstable in the human body. Their tendency is to degrade and lose their function very quickly. And so this is a challenge if one wants to use these medicines and treat diseases that might take place over the course of days or even weeks and months. Our interest is in regenerative medicine, and tissue regeneration can take place over the course of weeks, sometimes several months, which means we needed to be able to stabilize these biological molecules to be able to use them effectively as medicines. So we started asking the question, is there a place in nature in which these molecules are stable and retain their function and structure over very long periods of time? And what we found was that in fossilized remains, these kinds of molecules could remain stable not just for days and weeks, but even for centuries and millennia, even in the face of significant global cataclysms. So we used that as an inspiration to synthesize new materials that were similar to fossils, but would be able to incorporate biological molecules and release them over time. These new drug delivery systems have now been used to deliver tens of different proteins, messenger RNA strands, and plasmid DNA strands. And they've been useful in treating a wide range of conditions in preclinical studies in animal models, including bone regeneration, cartilage regeneration, spinal cord injury repair, and a number of other applications. That technology now has been licensed to a startup company called Dynomi Therapeutics, which is developing the technology to treat underserved medical needs. The next example I'd like to describe involves mimicking the earliest stages of human tissue development. When I started my faculty career at the University of Wisconsin, I was fortunate enough to be at an institution that was a leader in stem cell biology and developmental biology. My expertise in material science was complementary to those efforts and led to a series of collaborations involving using new materials that we created to try to control the development of new tissues from human stem cells. In particular, we were interested in working with what are called human-induced pluripotent stem cells, co-discovered by Jamie Thompson's group at the University of Wisconsin. These are cells that can be derived from an adult human patient and reprogrammed into cells that can both self-renew and create copies of themselves, but also differentiate into all of the cell types that are present in the adult human body. You can imagine this is an extremely powerful cell type. But one has to be able to control their differentiation process and control the types of cells and tissue these cells make in order to make them a useful tool for discovery. We became interested in controlling the differentiation of these cells into brain cells, the variety of different cell types that are present in the human brain, and controlling their organization into brain-like structures, with the goal of trying to make new discoveries in treatment of important brain diseases, such as brain cancer and Alzheimer's disease. Since then, we've developed a new startup company called STEM Farm that's developing these new technologies for organization of small models of the human brain in a dish. We can now generate hundreds of mimics of the human brain simultaneously and use those mimics to ask questions about which drugs, treatments might be effective in treating neurodegenerative diseases and in brain cancer kinds of applications. And we're really just scratching the surface of what's possible in these kinds of models. We can generate other types of tissues in a dish as well, combining our materials with these cell types and using inspiration from the development of human tissues. So again, an example in which we're using nature as a guide as we develop these new technologies. The last example I'd like to describe is perhaps the simplest, and it involves literally trying to generate medical devices that grow on trees. So the diversity of the plant kingdom, as many of you likely know, is vast and almost entirely unexplored in medical device technologies. Plants have evolved over more than 500 million years to have special properties, and some of these properties are consistent with what we need to make better medical devices. Examples include excellent fluid transport properties, advantageous structural properties over at least 5 orders of magnitude, extending from cellular alignment to mechanical integrity on a broad scale. A couple of examples in which we've used these properties involve engineering new tissues. So what we endeavored to do was take plants from the plant kingdom, process them so that they could become useful as medical devices, so that mammalian cells would attach to these cells, human stem cells, for example, would attach to these plant-derived structures and would be able to grow into new tissues. A couple of examples that might illustrate the concept are, one, the use of plants as a matrix, as a scaffolding really, to expand stem cells. So we can seed stem cells onto plant-derived structures and they grow over an extended time. Plants have a uniquely high surface area to volume ratio, and plants can be made quite large. The elephant ear type plants or anthurium plants that you might see in a tropical rainforest are an example of this very high surface area to volume ratio and this very, very large structure. We were able to seed human stem cells onto these elephant ear plants and allow them to continuously grow over the course of weeks to generate orders of magnitude more stem cells than competing technologies over a similar period of time. A second example involves using sorghum leaves, which are commonly present in nature, to attach skeletal muscle cells, align those cells, and allow them to develop into skeletal muscle tissue. Many of you know that skeletal muscle is aligned axially, and so we have these sort of extended striations that are present in the tissue. We've used sorghum-derived leaves to try to impose that structure upon the mammalian cells and develop new tissues. So our goal in the next phase of this work is to be able to engineer three-dimensional skeletal muscle that's both structurally aligned and functional so that we can create replacements for volumetric muscle loss that can happen in trauma, and that we can create large-scale meat structures that might be used as products for food. I should mention also that there are almost 400,000 known types of vascular plants in the world, so there's tremendous opportunity. One can imagine a broad range of additional applications that I have not yet mentioned. A simple example maybe that you can imagine immediately is the use of a strong, tough plant material like a bamboo stick as a bone replacement or as a prosthetic. It's almost endless what one can think about gaining from the plant kingdom. I'd like to, at this point, acknowledge and talk about some things that I think are special about Illinois Wesleyan University while I have this opportunity to speak with you. First, I'd like to assert that your professors are incredible, dedicated inspirations for how you can impact the world. I was a physics major when I was at Illinois Wesleyan, and physics is a special department at this outstanding institution. Anyone who's ever attended one of Dr. Narendra Jaggi's lectures will know that he can be at once informative and mesmerizing in his lecture capabilities. I was also fortunate to be here when Professor Gabe Spalding came to campus. I started working with Gabe early on during his time here. I may have been his first research student on campus. And I can say without hesitation that my work with Gabe completely changed the trajectory of my career. I was able to get involved in research in a way that I had only dreamed of. And Gabe had a way of encouraging both curiosity and rigor in science that has been unmatched in any place that I've been since. Truly special teacher and advisor. You are also fortunate to be enrolled at a yes and institution. President Nugent and your athletic director, Mike Wagner, both within the last year have described to me Illinois Wesleyan as a yes and institution. So this is a bit of a mantra around here, it sounds like. What that means is you don't have to choose to become only a physicist or only a chemist or only a business student. You can also be a baseball player or a football player or a musician or a theater major. There's lots of possibilities, and one doesn't have to choose one or the other. One can engage in all of these opportunities at once and really take advantage of all of those opportunities to build what will become the foundation for your life's journey. I'd like to mention a couple of people that were really important to me at this yes and institution. The first is Coach Dennis Martell, who's the head baseball coach here. Coach Martell was very supportive of people engaging in academic activities and activities outside of baseball. He was tremendously supportive of my research work, even when it was disruptive to baseball efforts. And he promised early on when I was recruited here that physics would be every bit as important as baseball, and he delivered on that promise entirely. Our hitting coach while I was here was a very special human being named Mike Brown, who we called Brownie. Coach Brown was a tremendous influence on me and countless other players here. He sadly passed away last year, but Coach Brown was able to create a community and to keep in touch with us as we went off and developed our own families and our own activities outside of baseball. I would get a call once every month or two from Coach Brown, catching up, asking about family, and asking about my career and where things were headed. He was a wonderful human being and an example of the type of person that you routinely run into here at Illinois Wesleyan. So I want to emphasize that the lessons you learn here can influence the rest of your life's journey. All of the people that I just mentioned at Illinois Wesleyan have met my wonderful wife and 3 great kids. They've been supportive of them. My kids have come and played baseball on the IWU baseball field. They've toured the Science Center. It's a fantastic community. As former IWU President Minor Myers was fond of saying, do well, but more importantly, do good. The people who work here model that concept on a daily basis. It truly is a special place. I'd like to close with not advice for students. I'm 45 years old. I haven't developed enough wisdom yet to have broad advice for the students of Illinois Wesleyan, but I can close with an invitation to the students. I hope I've convinced you today that there's so much more to discover and leverage in nature, that all disciplines can contribute to the future of biotechnology and biomimicry, not just biologists, chemists, physicists, and mathematicians, but also business students and pre-law students and other kinds of disciplines can all contribute to the development of these technologies toward having impact on society. I hope you'll decide to apply your many talents to this field. Your IWU education is preparing you wonderfully to make breakthrough discoveries and turn them into real-world products. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today.
Thank you so much, Bill. Very frequently in your words, you alluded to inspiration. And I found your talk to us today truly inspirational. I also have to say, when you described your work, I found it truly astounding and kind of verging on science fiction, but that's terrific. And thank you so much for your kind words about the university. It is truly inspiring to see what a graduate like you can accomplish and bring back to our campus and our students. So with that, I want to thank all of you for attending Dr. Murphy's talk this morning, and I hope that it will be shared widely across the campus. There are many wise words there that would benefit our students from hearing. So thank you and be well.